Listeners, you are welcome to the analysis of the poem Pedestrian to Passing Benz-Man. This poem was written by a Kenyan poet called Albert Ojuka. You man, lifted gently out of poverty and suffering, we so recently shared, I say, why splash the muddy paddle onto my bare legs as if still unsatisfied with your seated opulence? You must sully the unwashed with your diesel smoke and muddy water, and force him by, beyond his mean, a bar of soap from your shop? A few years back we shared a master. Today you have none, while I have exchanged a parasite for something else. But maybe a few years is too long a time. This is the end of the poem Pedestrian to Passing Benz-Man by Albert Ojuka. Before I go on, let me give the meaning of 4 terms which I find very crucial in this poem. The first word is pedestrian. Pedestrian is a person walking rather than traveling in a vehicle. Pedestrian is a person walking rather than traveling in a vehicle. Another term is Benz-Man. According to this poem, Benz-Man is a man who owns and drives an expensive car called a Benz. According to this poem, Benz-Man is a man who owns and drives an expensive car called a Benz. Another term is opulence. Opulence means great wealth or luxuriousness. Opulence means great wealth or luxuriousness. The last term is sully. Sully. This is a verb that means to make debt. Sully is a verb that means to make debt. Now, having seen the meaning of those terms, what is the poem Pedestrian to Passing Benz-Man about? This poem is about a pedestrian who is complaining against a motorist or the Benz-man who splashes mud on him. Both the pedestrian and the Benz-man were friends and poor before the Benz-man became rich and betrayed his friends. From this poem, you see the pedestrian saying, out of poverty and suffering we so recently shared. This shows that in the beginning, both the pedestrian and the Benz-man were poor. They shared poverty and suffering. All in all, the poem is about power and the arrogance of the rich. Themes from this poem. The first theme is power and arrogance, or richness and arrogance. This poem shows the corrupt nature of power. Many people begin to be arrogant after becoming rich. They see other people, especially the poor, as nothing. In this poem, The pedestrian asks a rhetorical question as follows: why splash the mud puddle onto my bare legs as if... See, this shows how the Benz-man splashed the mud puddle onto the pedestrian. Then this is an indicator of arrogance. This shows how the persona complains against the evils of the Benz-man of splashing mud onto him. The second theme is poverty. The poem shows that the pedestrian is poor. He has been suffering and still, but without success, because other people betray him and get opulence through deceit methods. The persona walks even barefooted. He says, "My bare legs." In this poem, we also see that the major means of transport for the poor is walking. Dear listeners, the third theme is classes in the society. Classes in the society. In this poem, the poet shows that in our societies there exist two classes of the poor and the rich. The rich class is represented by the Benz-man, who owns an expensive car called the Benz, while the poor is represented by the pedestrian, whose major means of transport is just walking. The rich own the major means of production, hence they continue to be rich, and above all, they exploit the poor. The major means of production, like shops, are owned by the Benz-man, according to this poem. The persona says, "And they force him buy, beyond his mean, a bar of soap from your shop." Dear listeners, the last theme is exploitation. In our societies, the rich get their richness through exploiting the poor. In this poem, the Benz-man splashes the mud onto the pedestrian as a means of forcing the pedestrian buy a soap from the Benz-man's shop. This shows how the rich create different strategies to exploit the poor. Listen. "And they force him buy, beyond his means, a bar of soap from your shop." These are the themes found from this poem. But what kind of poem is this? This is a sonnet because it has 14 verses. However, there are no rhymes in this poem. Who is the speaker or the persona? The speaker in this poem is the pedestrian, who is complaining against the motorist. Structure of the poem. This poem has one stanza of 14 verses. What about the mood and the tone of the poem? The mood and the tone is lamentation and sadness. Lamentation and sadness. The pedestrian is lamenting against his friend, the Benz-man. And therefore, because the pedestrian has understood that The Benz-Man is a traitor, is therefore said. Language use. Dear listeners, the language used in this poem is just simple. Common vocabularies have been used, but the poet has also employed figures of speech, like enjambment. But what is enjambment? Enjambment means incomplete syntax at the end of the line, where the meaning runs over from one poetic line to the next without punctuation. So different enjambments have been used in this poem, like in the first two verses of the poem. The persona says, "You man, lifted gentry." Here the sentence is not over, and it continues, "out of poverty and suffering." So this is enjambment. Another figure of speech is simile. If you scan back to the poem, you will find the verse, "my bare legs as if." So that is simile, comparison of two or more entities using conjunctions. The other figure of speech or literal device is assonance. Assonance. So there are two words, mad and paddle. Okay, so in those two words, sound a, which in spelling is seen as u, creates some kind of a structure called assonance. And in the word musty and sal, okay, so that also creates assonance. Apart from that, we see rhetorical questions. There are several questions being asked here just for rhetorical effects, but not in need of answers. Like, why splash? You see, there is in the poem a place where the persona asks a question. Why splash the muddy paddle onto my bare legs as if still unsatisfied with your seated opulence? So that is a rhetorical question. Okay, so dear listeners, apart from rhetorical questions, we also see imagery. Imagery. Diesel, smoke, and the muddy water are visual images which have been employed in this poem. Dear listeners, students, teachers, and all lovers of literature, having heard the analysis, what message do you get from the poem? Is the poem relevant to our society? Thank you very much for listening. See you in the forthcoming videos. And ciao.